Lemhi County, Idaho, July 10th, 2015. Population, 8,000. Miles from the nearest town, 60. A 2-year-old boy walks into a forest and disappears off the face of the earth. Over a decade has passed since that afternoon. Hundreds of searchers scoured those mountains. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters swept the ridgelines. Psychics called in tips. Investigators flew in from 3 states. Not a single footprint was found. Not a scrap of clothing. Not a bone. Not a hair. A little boy named DeOrr Kunz Jr. simply ceased to exist. And to this day, no one has ever been able to explain how. This is the story of a family camping trip that ended in nightmare. And a mystery so deep, so strange, so fundamentally wrong.
Picture the kind of summer day that makes you forget the rest of the world exists. Blue sky stretched to the horizon, air thick with pine and dust. The kind of day that feels, in memory, like it belongs to someone else. Jessica Mitchell and her boyfriend, DeOrr Kunz Sr., had been planning this camping trip for weeks. They were a young couple, early 20s, from the small Idaho town of Leador, and they were excited to get their baby boy out under the stars. Little DeOrr was 2 years old. 2 years, 1 month, and a handful of days. He had his father's round face, and a smile people said lit up every room he walked into. They packed up their truck and headed to Timber Creek Campground, a remote spot tucked into the mountains of Lemhi County. Going with them were 2 older relatives, Jessica's grandfather, Bob Walton, who was in his 70s, and a family friend named Isaac Reinwand. 4 adults, 1 toddler, an isolated campsite with no cell service, no nearby trails, no passing traffic, just the mountains.
On the surface, it looked like a perfect family weekend. But within 24 hours, it would become one of the most disturbing missing child cases in Idaho history. The campsite itself was set along a small creek. It was enclosed, trees on 3 sides, with the creek running nearby. Investigators would later note that a 2-year-old alone, wandering from that campsite, would have had very few directions to go. The creek was shallow, the terrain was rough, the trees were dense. And yet, according to the story that DeOrr Sr. and Jessica would tell, a story they told and retold again with small but significant differences, the afternoon was unremarkable. Little DeOrr was playing near camp. The adults were doing what adults do on lazy camping afternoons, talking, relaxing, keeping half an eye on things. Then Jessica and DeOrr Sr. say they walked down to the creek, just a short distance, just for a few minutes. They left little DeOrr in the care of Bob and Isaac. When they came back, and here is where things become unbearable, the boy was gone. Just gone. Bob, the elderly grandfather, said he saw the boy. Then he didn't. Isaac said the same. Nobody heard anything. Nobody saw him walk off. Nobody heard crying or splashing or the sound a small child makes when he falls. No one saw the direction he went. They searched the campsite. They searched the creek. They called his name until their voices echoed off the trees and came back to them, hollow and unanswered. At approximately 2:26 p.m. on July 10th, 2015, Jessica Mitchell dialed 911 from the one spot in those mountains that caught a thin bar of signal. The call that came through was fragmentary, barely intelligible, but the words were clear enough. Her son was missing. From the moment that call came in, the clock was running. And what happened in the hours that followed would raise questions that have never been answered. Search and rescue teams arrived in waves, dozens, then hundreds. They brought in tracking dogs, the best in the region. Dogs trained specifically for this kind of terrain, this kind of search. The dogs worked the campsite. They worked the perimeter. They worked the creek bed downstream, the slopes uphill, the game trails through the trees. The dogs hit on scent near the campsite. And then the trail simply stopped. Not at the water,
not at a trail, not at a road. Just stopped. As if little DeOrr had been there one moment and was gone the next. Experienced search and rescue coordinators said they had never seen a trail end that way. A child's scent doesn't just vanish, unless something happened to the child before he ever had the chance to walk away.
In the days following the disappearance, investigators sat down with DeOrr Sr. and Jessica separately, standard procedure. And what they found were stories that didn't just differ in small ways, they shifted, contracted, and expanded in ways that alarmed seasoned detectives. How long were they away from the campsite? First, it was a few minutes. Then it was longer. Then shorter again. Where exactly was DeOrr Jr. when they last saw him? That answer changed too. Was the grandfather watching him directly? That detail blurred. Why does it matter whether it was 2 minutes or 10? Because in 2 minutes, a 2-year-old cannot vanish into terrain like that without a trace. He would have left footprints. He would have made noise. He would have been found. Investigators brought in a private firm, a forensic investigation company out of Texas called Vern Pearson Investigations, to conduct a separate analysis of the parents' accounts. After conducting polygraph examinations, the investigators released a statement that sent shockwaves through the case. They believed both parents knew more than they were saying. DeOrr Sr. and Jessica categorically denied this. They maintained their innocence. They appeared on news programs pleading for information, sobbing on camera, begging whoever had their son to bring him back. They pointed fingers at the area, at unknown strangers, at the forest itself. But the investigators weren't satisfied, and the polygraph results were not the only thing that troubled them. There was the matter of Isaac Reinwand. Isaac, the family friend who had been at the campsite, had a history that investigators found relevant. He had prior run-ins with law enforcement. He had connections in the area that seemed strange for a casual camping companion. When questioned, investigators noted that his answers were, in the words of one source close to the case, inconsistent with a person who has nothing to hide. Isaac was never charged with any crime in connection with the disappearance. Neither was anyone else. The deeper investigators dug, the stranger things became. Not dramatically strange, not in the way of TV thrillers. Strange in the quiet, nagging way of a detail that keeps you awake at 3 a.m. because it doesn't fit no matter how you arrange it. There was the question of the timeline. Cell phone data. Investigators analyzed the phones belonging to those at the campsite, attempting to reconstruct a precise timeline of movement and communication. What they found raised questions about when certain calls were made, and more importantly, why those calls were made, when they were made. There was the question of the grandfather's health. Bob Walton was elderly and in declining health. Was he physically capable of supervising a 2-year-old in that terrain? Who really had eyes on little DeOrr in those final minutes? By the end of 2015, investigators had named DeOrr Sr. and Jessica as suspects. Not arrested them, not charged them, but named them publicly, which is a designation that carries enormous weight in a small-town community and in the court of public opinion. The couple denied any involvement. They split up shortly after, a fact that tabloids would fixate on as damning, even though grief destroys couples every day in ways that have nothing to do with guilt. Bob Walton, the grandfather, died in 2016, taking whatever he knew to his grave. Isaac Reinwand slipped back into obscurity. And somewhere in the mountains of Lemhi County, or somewhere else entirely, DeOrr Kunz Jr. remained missing. No leads, no breaks, no body. Here is what it means, truly means, for a child to vanish without a trace. It means that every few years, when a hunter goes up into those mountains, parents somewhere hold their breath. It means that search teams who went up in 2015 still think about those woods, still replay the maps in their heads, still wonder which ridge, which ravine, which dry creek bed they missed. It means that the case file stays open on a detective's desk in a county with more cattle than people,
A county that doesn't have the budget for an ongoing investigation. A county that did everything it could and came up empty.
The FBI became involved at various points. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children kept his file active. Tips trickled in over the years. A reported sighting here, an anonymous tip there, and each one was followed up, and each one led nowhere. In 2016, the Lemhi County Sheriff said publicly what many in law enforcement had privately believed for months, that DeOrr Kunz Jr. was likely deceased, that the disappearance was likely not accidental, and that someone at that campsite knew more than they had ever said. No arrests followed. No charges, no trial, no justice. The case went cold in the way that only small jurisdiction cases with no physical evidence go cold. Not with a dramatic dead end, but with a slow, exhausted quieting. Like a fire that runs out of fuel and simply stops burning, leaving only ash.
What do we do with a case like this? We can't resolve it with a Reddit thread. We can't solve it with speculation. And yet we can't look away, because the alternative, forgetting about DeOrr Kunz Jr., feels like its own kind of injustice. He was 2 years old. He liked trucks, according to his family. He was afraid of dogs, but not horses. He called his dad Dada and his mom Mama. He had only been alive for 26 months, barely long enough to accumulate the small, stubborn details that make a person real in the minds of others. And yet, he is real. He is real in the files of the Lemhi County Sheriff's Office. He is real in the memory of every search and rescue volunteer who spent those sweltering July days walking grids through the brush, calling his name. He is real in whatever truth is still locked inside the people who were there that day. The official case remains open. DeOrr Jr. would be 13 years old today, old enough to have opinions and embarrassments and a favorite band, old enough to be starting to figure out who he is. Instead, he is a file, a photograph, a name on a website, a mystery. So I'll leave you with the question that investigators, journalists, and thousands of people across the internet have been asking since July of 2015. What really happened to DeOrr Kunz Jr.? And why does the truth remain buried in those mountains, silent and unmoved and out of reach? Drop your theories in the comments. I read every single one. And if you found this video, share it, because cases like this only get solved when they stay in front of people's eyes. I'll see you in the next one.